We're all told stories as we grow up. Fables, fairy tales, stories about mythical creatures, of good versus evil, of right and wrong. Every neighborhood has its own stories, its own urban legends. That weird old lady who never leaves her house, that yard you know not to follow your ball into because of the big scary dog. But as we grow and learn, we come to realize that these urban legends are, more often than not, fantasy that we have created to find ways to identify with our environments, with the people in them, to give us challenges and beliefs, a way that we shape the world around us with our creativity. We all see the world through unique eyes. Over the years, Tim Burton has brought his special and whimsical view of the world to audiences of all ages all over the globe. But none of his world has both delighted and troubled us as that of Edward Scissorhands. As a teenager in suburban Burbank, California, Tim Burton created Edward as a projection of his feelings of isolation and lack of communication from his peers, something many of us can relate to. Years later, when he was able to team up with writer Carolyn Thompson, visual effects and creature creators at Stan Winston Studios, and production designer Bo Welch, Burton was finally able to see Edward, the thin, pale boy with scissors for hands, come to life. And the modern fairy tale of Edward Scissorhands was born. When we watch this film, either for the first time or the 100th, we can't help but feel that we are seeing the world through Edward's eyes. His first journey outside of the grayscale confines of his dilapidated mansion reveals an extremely bright and colorful, albeit cookie-cutter, world. In stark contrast to his dark, angular, monochromatic environment, the world below Edward's Hill is made up of buildings that are very squat and square. It's a kaleidoscope of colors, overwhelmingly stimulating surroundings for a creation who's only ever been within the confines of his creator's home. The inventor's mansion is inspired by the German Expressionist movement of the early 20th century. The characteristics of this type of design are rooted in the fantastical, highly original creations of distorted forms with Gothic influence, such as ornate detail, pointed archways, etc., giving way to symbolism and style over realism, often inspired by natural phenomena, rock formations, mountains, caves, etc., and with a very high level of craftsmanship. Works become art rather than merely architecture. Back in the repetitive world of boxes below, Bo Welch used part of a newly built suburban neighborhood in Florida as the setting for the Anywhere USA town to which Edward has been invited. This setting was inspired by the repetitive cookie-cutter city of Burbank, where Tim Burton grew up and was inspired to draw Edward. The more unique locations, architecturally speaking, are the Southgate Shopping Center, the bank, and the police station, all for very different reasons. We love the retro vibe of the plaza, built in the 1950s by Publix grocery store founder George Jenkins to anchor his grocery store. It's colorful, open, bustling, and, despite its era, feels more like the real world than any other setting in the film. In contrast, both the bank and the police station are sterile and cold. There isn't much color in either. The bank relies on signage for identity, and not just the sign that reads "Bank," but also the giant vault door behind the loan officer. The police station has the standard tells, the stereotypical perforated acoustic paneling on the walls, warm wood trim, bars on the unreachable and small windows, a tall and opposing desk where the sergeant processes offenders. It practically screams law and order. The sun shines on this kaleidoscopic realm, giving the illusion that it's a much more inviting place than it is. Here, in stark contrast to Edward's pale complexion, the residents have color. Their hair is generally softer and full of life. They wear brightly colored clothing and accessories, while the clothing that Edward is given is still grayscale, further distancing him from those around him. Down here, where everyone is striving to be unique but not so different that they don't belong, Welch selected 4 colors that repeat amongst the houses, which he described as butter, dirty flesh, seafoam green, and dirty blue. There are no mature trees, leaving a clear view of the blue sky and its billowy, almost magical-looking clouds. This is one of the reasons that this location was selected. To help subtly oppose this notion of openness, the windows in the homes were either covered or reduced in size to create a more paranoid-looking world. Every car is painted a bright color, but devoid of any particular form to appear very generic. It's a world of monotony and blending, a world where you either belong or you don't. But when is this? Typically, the answer is sometime within the 50s and 60s, as Burton tends towards these eras. However, we looked closely at clothing style, props, vehicles, technology, architecture, etc., and really can't place it. The family car is decidedly a 1974 Plymouth Duster. However, there are cars in the movie that are from 1973 all the way into the mid-80s. None of the women, except for Peg, have careers. The men are decidedly checked out and are only seen in social gatherings or in a professional capacity. Alan Arkin's character of Bill Boggs comes off as the quintessential mid-century dad, with his non-involved attitude and generic words of wisdom.
They reach a certain age, they develop these gland things, their bodies swell up, they go crazy.
The children are a very different matter. Their styles range from the late 70s to the early 90s. They speak and act in a modern fashion, clashing completely with their adult counterparts. So basically, there is no specific time. And that's fine, as this fairy tale doesn't need it. It's not about that. It's about humanity and self-discovery. It's about a journey that doesn't need a specific time and place to occur. And that's why it works. That's why we are so casually able to accept the fantastical world and characters that have been created. Though the time period may be elusive and hard to pin down, the one thing everyone can agree is that this movie has style, visually speaking. And what Tim Burton film doesn't? The visionary director has been developing a unique style all his own his entire life. Every film of his transports the viewer into his imagination, becoming a part of his personal world and view. And Edward Scissorhands, his first and most personal film, is no exception. We not only see it in the world that's been created, but in its detail. The very inspiration of Edward comes from pieces of the inventor's incredibly whimsical cookie-making conveyor belt. We can see it in the topiaries that Edward creates, the one connection that he has to his own world on the hill. There is generally no theme or reason as to why these particular figures. They're random images that Edward has in his limited experience with the world outside. And what else can a man with scissors for hands do than find a way to bring those figments of his imagination to life? Well, he can cut hair, and does. First for dogs, and then for the women of the neighborhood. But he doesn't just cut their hair, he creates art. Whether or not you like the styles that he conceives, one cannot argue that they are not incredibly special. Once again, he proves that he can think more uniquely than everyone else who's been limited by the confines of their controlled realities. And for a while, this gains Edward acceptance in this world. But, as is typical of humans, once they've no more use for Edward, and because they cannot reconcile his isolation with his lack of experience, they're done with him. He shifts from being an exciting new toy to a pariah, or at least a burden. Curiosity gives way to fear and apprehension, and Peg is probably right.
It might be best if he goes back up there, because at least there he's safe.
Maybe it's better that way. Edward Scissorhands was always too good for this world, or rather that world, any world. But his journey allowed him to know himself, and to know love. And while we are saddened by him once again returning to isolation and loneliness, we find solace in knowing that at least he's safe from the influences of an overly burdened and frankly, bleaker world than that from which he came. The world he comes from is different. He's different. And that couldn't be more beautiful. Thanks for watching. Is there anything you'd like to add? Any films you'd like for us to cover? Leave a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our others. Give us a like, a subscribe, and follow CineStructure on social media.